Hey everybody, this is the fourth here. And in this video, I'm going to be taking a little look at bus tracks. What are they and what can you use them for? Bus tracks allow you to combine the output of individual mixer tracks into a single mixer track so that you can process them as a group. There are a number of different reasons you may want to do this in your production. I'll be giving you a few ideas throughout this tutorial, but you will probably learn more about how bus tracks will fit into your production workflow as you gain more experience. I definitely use bus tracks a lot more often than I used to. So what are some common uses for buses or bus tracks? And one of these is when you're working with a layer. So let's say I have this layered snare clap sound. Now I can route all of these to their own mixer track and process them individually. But let's say I also want to process them as a group. And what I would do is create a bus track. So I'm just going to call this snare bus. And if you're not sure how to use the FL Studio mixer routing, you'll kind of see me here. If you're not sure how to do it in your digital audio workstation, if you don't use FL Studio, that's definitely something that you should look up. And with FL Studio, I also cover in the previous video in this tutorial series. So I've made my bus track, and now I just need to route each of these sounds through that bus track. And now it's just a lot easier for me to adjust the level of the overall sound. Or EQ the overall sound. Or do whatever I want to that overall sound. So doing this allows me to process them independently and process them as a whole. So bus tracks can definitely be useful when you're working with layers. And another thing that bus tracks are commonly used for is to create instrument group tracks in your mixer. So let's say I have this drum beat here. And if I wanted to, I could create a bus track that would allow me to process the whole drum beat as one thing. So I could change the level of it, EQ it, compress it, or whatever. And so I'm going to do that and call this drum bus. And just route these tracks through that. And now you can see if I mute that track or change the panning of it or the level, it affects the entire drum beat. So creating these bus tracks for your various instrument groups can be very helpful and possibly improve your workflow. So some examples of common instrument group buses you might have, you might have a drum bus, you might have a synth bus, or you might have a bass bus if you're working with complextro or dubstep or any kind of bass music like that. And you might even have an ambient bus for any ambient background effect kind of sounds. So which instruments and what kind of buses you create is going to be up to you and going to be up to the song that you're making and your preferences. And doing this is really a great idea because if you're mixing your track and you find out that your synth sounds kind of overpower your drum sounds, but they sound good in relation to each other, you can have that synth bus and just reduce the level of the entire synth bus, rather than having to adjust those levels independently or select all of those mixer tracks and reduce the levels and all that. And keeping along the same example, if your synth bus sounds fine in relation to the drums, but your hi-hats don't cut through enough, you could EQ that synth bus to just make a cut in the high end so that the hi-hats come through a little bit more. And it's just a really easy way to, cut the high frequencies on all of those sounds just to help the hi-hats come through a little bit better. And another common example is compression. People will tell you that compressing your drum bus or whatever bus will help glue your sounds together and or just keep your peaks in check. And a final thing that it allows you to do, as I kind of showed you previously, is you can mute or solo a whole group. So if I didn't want to hear the drums and I wanted to focus on the synths, I could just mute that drum bus. And, in this case, it's not a big deal, but if I had like 15 different drum sounds, it's a lot faster to mute a single drum bus than it is to mute each of the independent tracks. So there are a lot of good reasons to make bus tracks for your different instrument groups. And another point I have written down here is called busception. And it's not necessarily a technique, but I just wanted to make sure that you do know that you can bus other bus tracks for more organization. So, if I have this drum beat here instead of that original drum beat, I could send this snare layer bus through the drum bus as well, just to have some more layers of organization. And I can just do that the same way by selecting the snare bus and then routing it through only the drum bus. So that can be pretty useful, especially if you want to be really organized and just keep things nice and straightforward and layered and all that. So, for example, if you had separate buses for your drums, your leads, your ambient sounds, and your bass sounds, you could keep the drum bus on its own and then kind of route the synth bus, the ambient bus, and the bass bus all through one big bus that you would just call synth sounds or not drums or something like that. And it just can help you get a lot more organization in your mixer. And one common example of that kind of idea, which is a different technique that you can use while utilizing bus tracks, is to create a pre-master bus. And the easiest way to do that in FL Studio is to just right-click an empty mixer track and then create submix to master. And you can see that it has automatically routed all the sounds through this submix. And if I want to call it pre-master bus, I could. And using a pre-master bus isn't something that I personally do, but some people do and some people find it helpful. So I figured I'd just let you guys know about that idea and the concept of making a pre-master bus. If you wanted to, you can look more into it and find out why other people do it. But like I said, I personally don't really use a pre-master bus. So those are pretty much the primary uses of bus tracks. They're kind of broad. The things I mentioned are pretty broad, so most of what you do with bus tracks are going to fall into one of those. And specifically how you use bus tracks is completely up to you. It just depends on how organized you want to be, how many layers of organization you want to be, and how your workflow works. It's definitely nice to create buses for layered sounds and for instrument groups. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you have a better idea of how to utilize bus tracks in your production. But like I said, how you actually go about doing it, or even if you do it at all, is completely up to you.